Hey everyone, and welcome to Startup Savants. I'm Annaka.
And I'm Ethan.
If you're a returning listener, welcome back. And if you're new, this podcast is about the stories behind startups, the founders who run them, and the problems they're solving. This episode, we're joined by Alisa Pospekhova, founder and CEO of Kindroot. We talked about what adaptogens are and why they matter, her background in marketing, and my favorite, the importance of strong branding.
Absolutely. And she tells a story about overcoming rejection that is just jam-packed with value. So if you're looking for some excellent, actionable advice about building partnerships and strengthening your brand, stick around till the end to hear what Alisa has to say.
Hey, Alisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
And we're excited to really jump into this conversation. Just to start off, tell us a little about the history behind Kindroot, its mission, and how you got started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I, kind of going way back, I was like your typical sick child. I was just every cold, every flu. I was always in the hospital, and it was always respiratory related. And I think, kind of dealt with it the normal way people deal with it, right? You kind of like go in the hospital, you get sick, you take some medication. But I don't think the root cause of the sickness was ever really addressed. And so that really turned into being kind of a sick adult where, it was that funny thing where I was like working out, I was like really healthy, but whenever there was a cold in the office, like I would always pick it up. Whenever I would travel 2 days later without a fail, like I was coughing and sort of sneezing. And it quite honestly just sort of got to the point where I was like, enough of this, I need to do something about it. And so it was, my mid-30s, I really started trying to figure out the root cause. And I was working with a naturopath, I was working with an herbalist, an acupuncturist, and went on this whole like holistic journey of healing inflammation and just like healing some of my immune deficiencies. And of course, a lot of it had to do with taking different herbs and vitamins and really like supporting the body and being able to fight off whatever that was sort of happening. And I felt incredible. Like, it takes a little time for all of these to build up in your system, but I started really noticing much more of a resilience than what I had before. And I was quite honestly hooked. So I went and did like a apprenticeship. I took some classes in like traditional Chinese medicine and herbalism, and more so quite honestly for myself. And then one day I was traveling, and I totally remember that day because it's like there's those moments, that kind of like cement in your brain. But I was traveling and TSA stopped me because I just put a bunch of my like herbal powders into Ziploc bags, and they were like, "What is this?" And I didn't even think twice about it. It's just like so funny because I was such a frequent traveler, and they like searched my bags. They ended up like letting me go, but they confiscated like my weird brown powders and whatever, because they were like, this is odd. And that was really the moment when I thought about it. I was like, there's got to be a better way of being able to consume some of these in a way that would be really convenient for travel and kind of like, delicious. And I was a person that was taking so many herbs already where I could just sort of take something very bitter and it didn't bother me. But whenever I would try to introduce it to my friends, they were like, okay, no kidding. Like, I'm not going to take this. This is like absolutely awful. And that really where it all began. And I generally have that attitude of like, how hard can something be? And fast forward, it's really, really hard. Like complete underestimation of the whole process. But that was really the beginning is, kind of came out of my own need and experience. And ultimately it evolved into the mission of the company of making things accessible and hoping to be kind of the gateway into this wonderful world of plants and supplements and adaptogens.
Perfect. And I had to look this up. I'm sure other people might have to as well. What are adaptogens and why are they central to the Kindroot product line?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So adaptogens they're a special class of herbs and mushrooms, and their primary function is to like help balance your body. And what's beautiful about that is that we all might have different reasons. Like two people might not be able to sleep, but one might not be able to sleep because there's one deficiency, and the other one might not be able to sleep because the cortisol levels are too high, right? And so they can both take adaptogens, and adaptogens will work differently within their body to kind of like balance them out. They will kind of cool down some of the heat aspects, or they can actually like rev things up. And so they really are great because a lot of the things that we're experiencing today in our modern lifestyle is because of stress. And that, affects our adrenals, it affects like our pituitary gland, everything. And so taking adaptogens in specific combinations can really help support you, lower the stress or the way that your body is able to cope with it. And so that is why I think there's such a revival and such an interest in all of these herbs that have been sort of used for thousands of years. And I don't want to say forgotten, because there's a lot of other, cultures that have continued to sort of use them. But I think we in sort of the Western world moved away from them in favor of more pharmaceuticals. And I think we're now sort of like coming back and rediscovering things that I think some other cultures are like, oh, we've been doing this forever. Like, you're welcome.
Like, welcome back to the party.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the business, and we can start from the beginning. Before launching, we read that you called up several manufacturers to see if they would make your product, but they all told you no.
Yeah.
Some probably a little more kindly than others. How did you overcome this obstacle and actually start making your product?
Yeah, no, so that was really, I would say, really pivotal. That was a big challenge to solve for me. I knew the product needed to be made. I knew sort of like the blends. I understood the ingredients, but then I ultimately needed that final piece of somebody's like, okay, we're going to mix it all together, package it, kind of get it out. I probably spent about 6 months researching different pharmaceutical companies, candy companies, lozenge companies, and calling and emailing all of them. Looking back now, I sort of understand, like, I get it. It's a more complicated product to make, and there's such a failure rate with startups that I thought I had an amazing idea, but they were probably getting 20 calls a day from all these other people that thought they had great ideas, right? And so I was just kind of hearing either a no, or I was hearing, okay, but the minimum order is going to be 3 million units or something that I couldn't even wrap my head around, And there was quite honestly a point where I was like, well, maybe it's just not going to happen. And then the pivotal moment was really when I started, like, I had to shift my thinking, which is what I think you always end up having to do in a startup environment. And I was like, well, why do I feel like I need somebody else to make it for me? It's going to be really hard, but I could actually make it myself. And I completely switched the route, found a candy scientist, found an herbalist, and then, we just really essentially started working on figuring out like a non-scalable small batch way of launching it with commercial kitchen. I ended up like essentially getting a mini degree in lozenge making and production and CGMP guidelines and all of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think it was a very, very important experience because I now know my product inside and out. And I hope that also made me a better partner to my co-packer now, because I sort of understand how hard it is. But I also know what happens if you overheat the product by 5 degrees. Like, I know if it's like comes in sticky, you can't tell me. Like, I know why that is. So overall, I think it was a really, really hard learning curve, but I think it was really beneficial.
Do you think that if you would have gotten a yes answer right off the bat, do you think that you would be where you are today? Or do you think that would have, obviously it would have completely changed the trajectory. Where do you think that you would be today if somebody would have said, yes, let's do it. Let's go forward?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't thought about that. What I know now, I actually think that would have been a completely wrong move, because quite honestly, since then, we've retweaked the formulations. I've changed the packaging here and there. I think that I would have had to order so much inventory that I don't even know what I would have done with it. So quite honestly, I actually feel like that would have been probably detrimental to the business. And I quite honestly thought I needed those. I was manufacturing them by hand for about 8 months before I actually found somebody. But I think I needed those 8 months. I needed to understand the production. I needed to see what the response was. I thought all 5 flavors would sell the same, and that just totally wasn't the case. I had one that was making 70% of the volume. So it really gave me time to make some of those like $500, $1,000 mistakes before ordering thousands of dollars worth of inventory.
Yeah. I know the anxiety of getting ready to order way too much of what you need and being like, if I mess this up, that's like a lot.
You definitely don't want to scale the issue. That's for sure.
No.
Yeah.
Even when it's like, okay, we need stickers, and it's like your minimum order is 5,000, and I'm like, guys, we have stickers for 20 years. Just don't mess it up.
We'll use the same art for the next 20 years. Yeah. Let's do it.
Forever.
Yeah. So I'm glad it was a learning curve that you needed, and having that hands-on kind of relationship with your product, I'm sure is extremely helpful at this point. And so Kindroot isn't your full-time gig right now. You still have a 9 to 5. Okay.
Still have 9 to 5.
How do you balance that 40-hour work week that we all kind of struggle through and running your own business? How do you keep that balanced?
I don't know, quite honestly, that I keep that balanced. I think the one thing that works is just being extremely organized. And by organized, I mean like my fun is scheduled, like everything is kind of scheduled in, and I sort of can't deviate. And I think that as long as I'm regimented and like, these are the things I need to get done today, these are the things I get done tomorrow, then I have the time to still incorporate some of the like fun activities or things that make me feel good. And I think that's important because I do think the first year I was so hyper-focused that I sort of neglected myself. And I felt that burnout, and I was like, this just isn't real. This can't kind of go on. So I think it's being organized. And then I think the second thing is that where I actually feel like it helps me is it forces me to be hyper selective with things that I do. So there's a million cool things that you can do for a brand or for a business. And I just really have to make decisions of like, what's going to move the most. And I think I'm pretty quick to abandon things that I feel like they're not working, right? So like I make decisions pretty quickly to like move on. So I think it's just a very disciplined way of running a business. I think that's what's needed now while I self-fund it. And then eventually, obviously there'll be a point where I'll be able to focus on it full time.
Yeah. Couple questions I'm going to come back into just a second. So you do have plans to move full time. What's it going to take for you to make that leap?
The interesting thing is that ever since the beginning, I've always said like, oh, I'm going to raise in 3 months. I'm going to raise in 6 months. And when that comes around, like I've been able to figure out how to make it work without going that route. And I think the reason, quite honestly, and this is just how much my thinking, I think, changed since the launch, right? Like I was thinking I was going to launch with a manufacturer, and I knew I would have to fundraise back then. And I had like a whole deck put together of projections, which is, I went back and looked at it a month ago, and I thought it was hilarious. Like the way I thought the trajectory of the business was going to be. But what I found out that I loved the most was the control of the strategic vision and the creativity. And I'm right now really, really committed to being able to hold on to it as long as I can. So I think I really look at it like, how long can I do this without needing outside capital? And I will sort of figure out the path to make that work.
Gotcha. So the commitment to your own vision is kind of resulting in hesitation in seeking outside funding. Am I following that right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Or at least getting the funding on my own terms, I think is very important, and I generally think that we need to celebrate more independent businesses and just people, doing it on their own, having that authenticity. And it's interesting. I never even thought about it when I was launching a business. That wasn't something that I even considered, but for me, that is the most important aspect now.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're fairly dedicated towards the path of continuing to stay bootstrapped, which I personally I love. It's the way that I ran my business, and I see lots and lots of successful businesses who continue to stay bootstrapped for the entirety of their lifespan. Is there a point though where you feel in the future that you feel like you've got things so buttoned up and you know what's going to happen? You have a very clean burning machine that if you throw money into one side, then you know more money comes out the other side. Is there a point that you do say, okay, we've got this, let's toss some real big money at the problem?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, probably at some point where I envision that point coming in is having a large partnership with like a mass retailer, right? Because at that point, it doesn't just take inventory, it takes awareness, it takes merchandising. Like there's a lot of those things. And I think, founders always get very excited about getting into the account, but that's like that can be the easy thing. And so I definitely am very mindful. I don't want to be the brand that gets in and then 6 months later kind of gets kicked out. So absolutely. I do think that, currently we're sort of like regional premium. We have good online visibility and partnership and, the launches that we've had. But I do think that at some point there will be hopefully Target, right, coming in, or Whole Foods coming in and saying, hey, we're going to give you national distribution or even international expansion. And to me, that is that would be absolutely the reason and the right reason to take money, to take funds and kind of expand. So I'm not against it. I just think that a lot of time it's just sort of done very early to acquire customers, maybe in an unsustainable way. But I absolutely think that there's a point where it's like, okay, to your point, let's turn it up and let's see how far we can take it.
Awesome. And we're definitely going to talk about at least one of those big name partnerships here in a little while. So just have the little tease on that. But let's talk about this. Kindroot is your first company, correct? Mm-hmm. So in your company profile, you mentioned that you always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but like most of us, it seems like you've spent most of your working years as an employee. What was it that finally pushed you over the edge to start Kindroot?
Yeah, no, so I always did have a lot of business ideas, but I felt like, and I've explored other ideas kind of like here and there. I think with Kindroot, what made sense was it was an industry that I felt really comfortable in. I've spent a lot of years working in like health and wellness. So I sort of like, I knew, and even though nothing really prepares you for entrepreneurship, and I will say day and day again that it's really like the grit and the resilience that separates people, whether you know how to read a P&L, all those things I feel like you can kind of figure out, or you can hire somebody who can help you, right? But it's really like the ability to push through. But I knew how this world worked. It was a product that I felt like I was really, really passionate about. And I just felt like I could do it. Like I truly was like, I think I can pull this off. And I think that was without necessarily needing co-founders and a lot of like outside, kind of forces coming in. So that I think was the pivotal thing, where previously I had an idea for like a travel website and it sounded really cool, but I was like, who's going to actually code it for me? How am I going to do it? This, I really felt like I can do it.
Yeah, that's huge. Just knowing how the basic idea of how you're going to do what you're going to do. I've been in that same place, and I know that there are kabillions of other people out there who have said, I've got this great idea for a product, but I don't know how to code.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, there have been the many questions of, should I learn to code? But I think, and I'm going down kind of a rabbit hole here, but I think, honestly, entrepreneurship is a skill just as coding is a skill. Mm-hmm. And if you can get yourself to a point where you need X skill, you can just hire for that skill. And if you can play all the other parts or just the parts that you excel in, then you don't necessarily need to know how to code. So everyone out there who's going to learn how to code, go ahead, do it anyway. It's great. But then also learn how to be an entrepreneur.
No, it's true. And I took, it's funny, I took a class on coding through General Assembly, and I walked out and I was like, okay, I feel like it's good. Like, I get the general sense,
right.
But I was like, this is not going to be my strength. Like, I could tell pretty quickly. I was like, this is not going to work. No. So I think it's good to like know your limitations, to your point, and kind of like know your strengths.
Right, exactly. And stick in you don't have to stick only in the industries that you know a lot about, but that is where your strength lies. And that leads me to the next question. You did start your business in an industry that you were comfortable in, but you combined two concepts or two industries. And we've seen lots of products take two industries or concepts and combine them into something new. For example, there's a company called Nerd Fitness, which is essentially a fitness company for people that like video games. It's kind of in the name, Nerd Fitness. And your company combines the benefits of aromatherapy and the healing properties of plants. How would you recommend that someone use the same approach to come up with their new business idea?
Yeah, no. What's interesting about that is that I think I am still sort of figuring out where exactly we're at. I think the beauty of being kind of like a new form or product is that we are very unique. And I think people who get it, and there's no substitute. And I would say same has been for a lot of our retail partnerships, where retailers say, hey, there's like nothing really like this. So, hey, we'll kind of bring you in. So I think that's been beautiful, right? I think on the flip side, we have to do a lot of education with consumers to like understand, because they're like, wait, so you're like a lozenge, but you have stuff in it. But what about ashwagandha? Why is it good? Like, there's all of these kind of like talking points that sort of like go into it, right? And so we're figuring out exactly what our positioning is still and how to kind of talk about it to the consumer. But I think at the base of it, if you look at the product, like, it's actually pretty simple, right? Like, lozenges already exist, herbs already exist. Like, it's an innovative product, but it's actually like a quite simple innovation. So I think my advice to anybody who's thinking about a product is like, it doesn't have to be super revolutionary, right? Like, I think a lot of times we feel like you have to invent an Uber or like whatever it is, but really you can just make a tiny little tweak to something that's existing that solves a very particular need, and there you kind of have it. So I would always say, like, look at an industry that hasn't been innovated in. For me, it was lozenges. Like, I remember standing in, CVS aisle and looking at the same 3 brands that I've been buying for 20 years. And I was like, it's interesting. Nobody seems to want to do anything in here. That to me was like, this is an open space for me to come in and do a few simple tweaks and have a product that's like very interesting. So don't worry about things like market share that they keep on talking to you about, because if I were to look at the pie chart and say, hey, gummies are huge, I need to like make a functional gummy. Well, I will have 200,000 competitors within that. Within the lozenge space, I don't really have anyone, right? So I would say go with your gut instinct and just look at all of these like spaces where you feel like is completely forgotten, and look at it and think about how can you infuse something a little bit interesting and innovative in it.
Right now, you are a one-woman show. Why did you decide to start this without any co-founders?
I didn't necessarily choose to have any co-founders. I mean, what was actually happening is that, I had an idea. I took the weekend. I came up with a name. I had a brainstorm with myself. I basically Googled the name and saw that the website and the Instagram handle were open. And I was like, I took it as a sign.
It is a sign.
And I registered the name right there.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things I remember when I was like, no, Kindroot, somebody for sure has to have it. Because again, it's a very simple like merger of two words. I'm like,
right.
Nobody had it. And I was like, oh, okay. I kind of like put a deck together and started working on it. And then 6 months later, I sort of had the concept, the way to move forward, and I kept moving forward. And similar to, the fundraising question, like there were points when I thought, oh, maybe I'll need to bring in a co-founder to help me with operations and finance. And I would say that is still an open door. Like that doesn't mean a co-founder cannot come in, but I think I've been really focused on making progress like day by day, week by week, month by month. And so I sort of just keep going with it until there's a point where I can't anymore. And that is when I bring in help, and I've done that with shipping the product by myself until I'm like, okay, well, I can't really do pallets out of my own house. So now I bring in a 3PL, right? Doing all of my content for social media until like it's too much. And then I brought in a video editor. So that is just generally my philosophy. I just do it. I try to scale to the point that I can, and then I bring somebody in. So I would say the idea of bringing somebody into the business is still open, and that might still warrant and justify. And I would say, for example, if there is a time to, or when that time comes to fundraise, that is not necessarily a particular skill of mine, and I know that. So that would actually be a potentially good opportunity for somebody to come in with like a really strong finance fundraising background who can help kind of manage that side. That can be a really, really big piece of the business.
That makes total sense. It's nice to have people on board to do a job that they would be 10 times better at than we would be.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've heard from a ton of different entrepreneurs, and I've seen this written a million times online, that entrepreneurship can feel really lonely, especially when you're in the founder's seat by yourself. How do you contend with this?
Yeah, it's, I always say, to me, entrepreneurship is kind of being in one of those like haunted houses. You willingly walked into it, and there's stuff that's going to be coming at you, but you're like kind of don't know when and where, but then you're kind of excited being there, and there's a certain adrenaline going. So absolutely, I think that the highs of entrepreneurships are probably like the most elated feeling I've ever felt. And sometimes it's even for the simplest things, right? You get a retailer, and then you get a second PO reorder, and you're like, all right, people are actually buying this. Like, this is cool.
Yeah.
But then there are problems, and ultimately, like, you're the only one, and it's all on you, right? Which is very different from a corporate environment where ultimately responsibilities are kind of shared. So for me, I've been lucky to meet other kind of early stage entrepreneurs. And ultimately, I usually have probably a weekly call with one or the other one of them. And we just call it like little therapy sessions. And we just sort of spend, 30 minutes each just unloading and coming up with solutions and problem solving. And that has actually been just the most incredible network for me. And it's interesting because I feel like some of them became my super close friends within like 3 months, because I think just that bond of building a company really, really unites you. So I would say that is probably the biggest advice that I would give to anybody, that find other founders at the similar stage that you're at, that are like spending, same amount of money. So you're like going through the same type of problems, and really build a really strong network of them.
How did you and how do others find those other founders in the same similar situation as you?
Yeah. Some of them came through like joining different accelerators or programs. And then you connect with people. Some of them actually happened in a very funny way where, I'll tell you, like, one of my close friends now, I commented on a post by Jamie Schmidt on LinkedIn, and she did too. And she saw my comment and she liked it. So she like sent me a message on LinkedIn and said, hey, do you want to connect? And we connected. And now I feel like we talk once a week, So I would say just be sort of like open to these types of serendipitous opportunities, but also reach out to brands, go to organizations. There's like for, at least in the natural food community, there's Naturally LA, there's like Naturally Denver. There are those types of associations that people join because they want to meet other people and they really want to connect. And that has really been truly incredible. Actually, I talked to one of them yesterday and we kind of like went through all of our wins and losses and finished up with a little pep talk at the end. And it completely like cleansed my soul after a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah. It's like the best vent sessions are when people just understand what you're going through. You know, if I said 3PL or PNL or any other abbreviation to anyone, they'd be like, what are you talking about? So it's just, you know, everyone kind of speaks the same language in those groups. So, and I was reading one of your other interviews that you had done, and I'm going to quote you real quick. I believe that as women, we tend to think we need to know it all before starting a business. But the truth is just that most of us are a lot more capable of figuring things out than we think. And so we just need to be confident and go for it. I wish I could heart react that. What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs who may need help building that kind of confidence?
Yeah, you know, interestingly enough, and I think this is like supplemental to your earlier question about like why starting a business, is that there was a point in my career when I was working for a startup. It was a really, really well-funded startup. It didn't end up going anywhere. But the interesting thing is that I was there and the founders were literally doing everything wrong. Like they were just doing everything wrong. And I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, like they have a good product. They're doing everything wrong. People are quitting left and right, but they do have a company. And the only thing that separates them is just the confidence to go for it, right? Like you kind of just kind of like make it happen. And so that was another reason I was like, I really just need to like find that confidence in myself and go for it. The truth is like, I don't know if the confidence is like really truly there. You kind of have to fake it for a little while, and then just sort of go for it. And then with everything that I solve, every problem that I sort of like overcome, that's what's building the confidence. And it's interesting because now like after starting business on my own, you know, figuring out how to produce them, figuring out the 3PL, figuring out the funding, like I'm sort of in that state where I feel like, okay, there's probably most things I can sort of figure out. But I think what helps me is reading some of these startup stories of people kind of making it in a small way. Because I think, unfortunately, what you hear a lot is these stories about people raising millions of dollars and, you know, going from zero to like 1,000 in like 3 months. And that's actually very, very unique. We hear about them a lot, but like that's not majority of the business. So for me, you know, modeling things after even like Sarah Blakely or, you know, Jamie Schmidt, like these women that really like took it from farmer's market or the backyard or whatever and grew them into these incredible companies, made me realize that, hey, I can just focus on day to day and I don't have to have like a 5-year plan. I don't have to want to sell the company in 3 years, right? Like I just need to focus on acquiring X users or getting into 2 more accounts. And then once I do that, let's look at the next thing. So it's really, I think, about solving the problems like in front of you rather than accomplishing these huge lofty goals.
Yeah, kind of like baby steps. And in building your confidence, I mean, you've tackled so many things. It just seems like, oh, here's a problem. All right, Alisa, go solve that one. How has that kind of changed other aspects of your life when you're kind of borrowing that confidence that you've earned as an entrepreneur and then applied that elsewhere?
I quite honestly think it calmed me down a lot. I tend to be like very excitable and, you know, like I'll get angry or panicky or whatever. And I think now that I've like, a lot of other things don't seem as big of a deal, quite honestly. And probably even in like my, you know, day-to-day job. And I'm like, hey, look, this is a problem, but it's probably not as big of a problem as getting like a cease and desist letter, right? That I just heard from a founder friend of mine that I talked to on Monday. I'm like, right, like that is like a real problem. Or, you know, your palette gets damaged and like you put all of your funds into it, which, I've been through. And I'm like, that is a real problem because now you don't have a product and you also don't have a way to sort of pay for it. So all of these little things that I feel like we get distracted by, and I kind of get distracted, somebody cutting you off in traffic or whatever, just don't seem as big of a deal anymore. I kind of just like accept them and move on. So it's probably a big statement, but I kind of feel like being an entrepreneur made me a better person in a way.
I love that. We'll look forward to the book coming out. How to use entrepreneurship to be awesome. And I'm gonna kind of go down a branding and marketing rabbit hole because this is my niche. You have a background in marketing. How did you determine the best marketing strategy for Kindroot, and what did that process look like?
Yeah. I am still trying to figure out the best marketing strategy, quite honestly.
It's a moving target.
It's a moving target. And, for example, again, I think entrepreneurship, interesting thing, like I designed the brand thinking that, my consumer was going to be 24 to maybe 45, right? Like the language, the copy, the like visual. And the interesting, difference that I found out once I started selling is that on my snooze flavor, like my biggest segment is 55 plus. And that was like I didn't think about it. That wasn't even in the back of my mind in any way. And the reason being, when I talked to them, is they said, well, we already take a lot of pills and supplements. We don't want to take another one. So we love that yours is in a lozenge because it's delicious. And I was like, okay, but the only thing I'm doing is like, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, like I'm not reaching these people, right? So I had to actually go through and like change my marketing strategy and talk to like my PR person and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't go after Well and Good, but maybe we go after like ARP magazine, or we're going after, the Today Show or whatever. So quite honestly, it's just been a lot of like being open to and reading the consumer and looking at who's buying the product, and then just kind of letting them lead me to where I need to be.
Yeah, and it's always a nice surprise when you're like, yeah, these are my people, and then it's like, just, you got a little bubble over here. And in developing your brand, I spent a lot of time on your website, like, ooh, I like that. Ooh, I like that. Ooh, I like that. This is like how I nerd out in my workday. Did you hire an agency or designer? It sounded like you were pretty involved in the process.
I was very well in the process. That's actually that was my favorite part of the whole process, of course. And I had a really like strong vision of what I wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. I got introduced through a friend. I told him, I was like, hey, I'm working on a brand. I'll need to like hire a copywriter and a designer. And he just said, we worked together before. He said, I want to introduce you to this woman named Sarah. She's a great copywriter. She just went freelance. And I just kind of feel like you guys would really hit it off. And I met her for coffee, and she showed me some examples of like copy that she wrote before. And I was like, this is it. Like, I don't even have to change it. Like, I feel like you get it. And, so then she came back and said, look, I have kind of like an idea for you. I know this other woman, we're friends. She loves color. And because I told her I wanted the brand to be really colorful. She's an illustrator. She's super talented. She's actually never done packaging before. But I feel like she'll nail it. And I can't explain it because, again, coming from corporate where you go through this like really regimented process of like putting RFPs together and getting 3 agencies and like analyzing all these things. Like, it was really just a feeling. I was like, I feel like you get me. I trust you. Bring in this other person. And that was sort of it, quite honestly. Like, and then the 3 of us started collaborating on it. And I think I'm really, really proud of what we created and what they created. Mm-hmm. I think they took my vision and just like, they took it to the next level. And I think it came out super authentic and super unique. But again, it's sort of one of those things where I'm like, I can't teach somebody almost how to replicate it because it truly just sort of came from the heart and just like us vibing together. And maybe that is the lesson, is that, especially for a creative process, like you can't force it. I feel like people really need to just understand where you're coming from and understand the brand. And then I feel like whatever comes out of it is like truly beautiful.
Yeah. It sounds like you found a team that just really got it right away. I know you just said that, but it's sometimes hard in the design space to be like, to communicate what you want your brand to be. We talk all the time as designers, like, how do I get web developers to speak design? And it's like, well, it might be the other way around. I might have to learn some different language there. How did you really define your brand to then speak to that target audience?
Yeah.
I know we're getting real deep right now. I'm really excited.
No. That's really true. And I mean, to your point about working with like design agencies or designers, I mean, I think that's probably where my past experience came in to where I feel like when you get bad design, rarely is it actually the designer's fault. Usually that means they weren't briefed correctly or given the right direction. And I've worked with a lot of people previously who would say things to me like, I don't know what I want this to look like, but I'll know it when I see it.
Oh, God.
And you're you're like, I don't know what to do with it, right? So yeah. I did put a lot of like ownership on my end of, I think I created like 10 different Pinterest boards for them. And I created like a whole PowerPoint presentation. A lot of it actually was like, there was a lot of like, I love this, but there was also a lot of this, like, I hate this, like, please don't do this. And so I think I gave them a lot of freedom with like guardrails of like, they knew exactly where to play. And within that, they could go kind of like wild and crazy, but they weren't going to be put in a situation they would show me something and I would be like, oh, you're showing me green. I don't like green. Why are you showing me green? And they're like, well, you could have told me that. And we would have saved 10 hours creation of like ideating on that. Right. So, I think that, my biggest advice probably would be like, if you're not sure where you want the brand to go, or you're not sure of that identity, hold off on bringing anybody else in, because they can't really figure it out for you. I think it becomes one of those like never ending iterations. Kind of take time and really like be certain where you want to go, and then bring somebody in to like make it better for you or push you. Because they also pushed me, right? Like I think there were certain things that I was like not comfortable with, and they were like, okay, let's just try, let's just go. And I'm sort of glad that they also helped expand like my horizons of what I thought I liked, or where we wanted to go. I sort of forgot what your question was. I hope I answered it.
It was, how does your brand speak to your target audience?
Yeah. Well, and so that's a good question. So for me, one of the really big things that I wanted to accomplish with this is that I felt like, at least when I was developing the brand, there was this like really big movement towards like minimalism and being sort of like super cool and aesthetic. And I think the first word in like my brief to them was cute and accessible. And I remember telling them, I was like, you know what? I know that cute is not like the word people want anymore, but I just want this brand to be overly cute, and I want it to be adorable, and I want it to feel super familiar and accessible to people. Mm-hmm. And a big reason for that was also because it was a new product, a new form. And so I was like, we can't also have a brand that has people like jumping through, right? Like they at least have to want to pick it up, and then they can go through and try to understand what the product is sort of selling them. So everything that we did was like to be irreverent and accessible and feel familiar. And that was even reflected in the brand Kindroot. Like I said, it's one of those names where you're like, oh, I feel like I've heard of them, or that is something that could have existed before, right? Like Kindroot could be like a 20-year brand. It could be a 1-year brand. So I really just wanted to break down the barriers for people to come into the brand as much as possible.
Yeah, and if anyone listening has not checked out the Kindroot site, go please do that now, because all the things you just said, familiar, accessible, cute, they're there in the choices of color, in the graphics. And I mean, we haven't really talked brand a lot with a ton of founders that we've had on here, so I relish any opportunity to talk about brand. And I know no one's actively rolling their eyes at me, but I can feel it. No, I'm just kidding. So I really do appreciate you even being willing to talk about it. And yeah, go check out the site because it's really nice.
Go check out the site. And we'll give the address at the end, but you
Yes.
listen to the end to hear that. No. So yeah, now that I'm here, I'm going to dig my way out of this branding hole that we are in.
No, let's stay in. Let's stay in.
All right, so yeah, just give me Kindroot branded answers for all the rest of the questions I'm going to ask. All right, so you spent quite a bit of time talking with your target audience before launching your brand. How did you find those users and facilitate those conversations? And what changes did you make based on the responses that you got?
Yeah. I was just talking to everyone and anyone about this, quite honestly. Like, I think, if I was at like a party and some unfortunate soul asked me what I was up to, like, I would tell them, right? So I feel like I was just bringing in every single person into the conversation. And so I know that some people are like very secretive before they launch a brand and it's like stealth startup or whatever. That wasn't me. I was really like sharing a lot of what I was working on and like asking and facilitating people's feedback. And, that was super important in like helping shape the brand in a lot of ways. I mean, I even had, a variety of different flavors that we were testing for each one of the SKUs. I think we would narrow it down to like 4 or 5. And I sort of knew what my preference was. But again, like I think every single one of my friends, random neighbors would all get samples, and I would sort of get, feedback from them, what they liked, what they didn't like. And sometimes, it was interesting because sometimes I would think I was making like a risky choice. And sometimes as a founder, you're like, I don't know, is this the right way? Is it not the right way? And that came to a flavor, like our mood flavor, lychee rosewater. I was like, I loved it, but I wasn't sure if people would understand it. And it was interesting because like, I think I gave the samples to like 10 people, and uniformly everybody said, this is the flavor. Like, this is amazing. You have to go with it. And, that kind of gave me the confidence to sort of move forward with it. So I think it's extremely, extremely important to get that kind of feedback as you go. We even had like a whole question of whether we were going to call it a candy or a lozenge at one point. And, I had somebody tell me, well, when I have a lozenge, I feel like I can have like 20 of them, but a candy, like I would probably limit myself to like twice a week. And it's not something like I thought about, but I was like, oh, that's an actually really, really interesting insight. And so that's why we refer to them like as lozenges rather than candy, even though you can kind of go either ways. And some of our competitors talk about their product as a candy. And we decided to stay like very supplement, like herbal direction based.
So you said lychee rosewater. Is that okay, so there's obviously a difference between tasting a flavor and reading the name of a flavor. Right. How do you, if I see, me, I'm just some random 30-year-old white guy walking down the aisles, and I see two different flavors, and one is cherry and the other one is lychee rosewater.
Yeah.
Probably might pick up the cherry just because that's easy. I understand what that word means. Mm-hmm. How do you deliver the experience that you're trying to give through? I mean, I guess it comes back to branding, doesn't it? Oh boy. So yeah, how do you do that?
No, and it's true. And flavors were interesting. Flavors is probably where I did take kind of a risk on most of them, but I had this like, at that point, kind of a bold point of view. I was sort of like, I don't want them to be conventional. I was like, I want them to be interesting, and I want them to kind of like pique an interest. So, that's why we have like lavender vanilla, which has a like very herbal kind of note to it, but people seem to love it. And then we had lychee rosewater, and then, one of our flavors was white tea, like citrus white tea. So they were all like these like blends, and I wanted them to be kind of have multiple notes. So with lychee rosewater, you kind of taste lychee, and then at the end of the note, you like taste the rosewater. It's all very blended, right? But again, I think with packaging, we then went very accessible and sort of fun. So even if people looked at the flavor and they're like, I don't know what that's going to taste like, they would still be interested in tasting it just based on how like cute and tasty like the packaging looked. But then we did work on the copy end. And so if you flip the packaging, we wanted to describe what that flavor was supposed to evoke. So we don't say like it tastes like lychee meets rosewater, blah, blah. We say like tropical spa vibes, you know, or for lavender vanilla, we say it tastes like, and I actually am forgetting, I think we say it's like sweet dreams or something like that. So we're trying to like evoke the feeling that that flavor is supposed to, that's supposed to get you to.
All right. You got me. I love that. All right. You know, and it's funny because these are probably the flavors that my fiance would be picking up. She would say, why do you want cherry? That's so vanilla.
So basic.
Play on words right there. All right. Moving on. You've mentioned that you don't currently have a large marketing budget. I'd like to hear what the word large means in this situation. But how are you getting your, here we go again, brand in front of more of your target consumers?
Yeah. So, you know, in the beginning, I was like kind of relying a lot on performance marketing, right? Like Facebook advertising, all of that sort of things that they sort of teach you that are very scalable, you know, whatever. And then the iOS changes came and it became like completely ridiculously inaccessible and really expensive. So quite honestly, and I was joking with a friend of mine about this yesterday, like we're all sort of going back to marketing 15, 20 years ago, and doing like all the old school tactic. Like I'm doing a lot of sampling. I am sampling at all events. I'm putting in different like boxes for people to try the product. We do PR outreach. We also work with like some micro influencers, but again, not people that are necessarily asking for payment, but people who truly like the brand and are posting about it like in exchange for product because they really, you know, like the ethos behind it. I would say that partnerships with other brands have really taken us far. And we do it both sort of on social media, but we've also done some interesting programs like D2C cross sampling. So we'll partner with a brand for a month, and we'll just do a free exchange where every single one of our shipments will get a sample of their product. Every single one of their shipments will get our product, right? So you're kind of like leveraging these free ways of like getting to audiences, and surprising them a little bit with your product and kind of getting out there. And then I'm currently also working on some partnerships with like hotels, airlines, again, like just trying to get to people where they are in the midst of using the product, and just offering it to try. Because ultimately what I found out over the past couple of years is like, specifically in our snooze flavor, when people try it, they love it. They love the way it performs. They love the flavor. So to me, it's like, why don't I just spend my money on letting them try it? Because then I know that they're going to come back and they're going to repeat, rather than kind of like putting money into potentially attracting a cold audience that may or may not convert.
Do you have any tips for entrepreneurs that are pinching every last penny to make the most out of a small marketing budget?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just be like really intentional with how you spend it. But also don't try to kind of at the same time be open to trying it. I mean, I think with marketing, the truth is that you kind of don't really know if things are going to work. You kind of have to just be open to spending a certain amount of money and see how it works. And, you know, I talk to so many people and sometimes there are brands where they've done a program and it worked so wonderfully for them and I do and it doesn't work for my brand and vice versa. So I would say the first year specifically, just try and do as many things as possible. And then going into the following year, I think you'll have a much better idea of what works for you.
So we teased it earlier. Now we're going to talk about it. You recently announced that Kindroot is going to be available on Target.com. Congratulations, first off. That's awesome. I mean, that's such a huge milestone for a young company. But I want to dig into the specifics about how you made this partnership happen, and whether or not it's created the results that you imagined it would. So let's actually start with that second question first. Has it performed in the way that you would have liked to it have?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been on it for 3 weeks, so it's it's a little sort of quick, but I think that so far I'm looking at the sales every single day, like obsessively, unhealthily, probably helicopter parenting the target pages. So yeah, I mean, so far I'm really happy with the performance, and actually there was sort of a surprise in that. Overall, our best-selling flavor is Sleep One, and on Target, it's the Mood One. And I think that's kind of reflective of probably a younger, like millennial mom demographic that kind of tends to shop there. So, but yeah, I mean, I think even in things like awareness for the brand, it's huge, right? Like they have so many shoppers. I think it allows to reach so many people who are, kind of shopping at Target for all the other different things. And then obviously, long term, this is something that I look at, hey, how do we perform at Target.com? How can we make it work? And then eventually, of course, I would love an in-store test and kind of go from there. Target was always very much like the account I had in mind when I was designing it. I kind of looked at everything that they had in store. I looked at their branding and like, that would absolutely be it's already a dream account, quite honestly, for us to get into the .com space. But, when we get into the Target retail stores, I mean, that's definitely going to be like a celebration moment.
So how'd you do it? How'd you get in there?
Good question. So I have a friend of mine who helps me on the sales side. She's been we worked previously together at a company, and she's been kind of amazing because she pretty much came in at month 1 when I sent her a presentation. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And she's like, it's interesting. And so she advises and helps me. And she's really been incredible at kind of going very guerrilla with outreach, looking at people on LinkedIn and sending them messages. So she actually just reached out to a buyer after finding her on LinkedIn, sent her an email. And what do you know? They kind of like responded. We sent them samples. And then I think about 3 or 4 weeks later, they responded and they said, and this quote is like kind of like embedded in my head, but she said, I think you're very, very ahead of the trend curve, probably for stores right now, but I definitely want to test you online. And that's ultimately where we want it to be, because we're not ready to go into Target retail stores. That would be a massive undertaking. So we were like, well, thank you for telling us we're ahead of the trend curve. We take that as a compliment, but then also let's test online and see how it works. Yeah.
So you've got your friend who's advising, who you've worked with in the past. She goes on to LinkedIn. She finds a buyer. She emails them. Okay, so I don't have that friend, but I'm going to go onto LinkedIn and I'm going to find a buyer for Target. What's in that email that you send out to them?
Yeah. So what has worked for us really is like being super genuine about the product. That's what people tend to respond to, right? So we always sort of open with, hi, we're a small female-led business from, manufacturing here in the US, right? Like that's sort of like off the bat, we're sort of saying, hey, we're not a big company, but take a look at us. We're sort of like interesting, unique. And then we usually do a very, very short blurb about, hey, we're putting out these new lozenges. They combine plant and whatever. And then we always add a line that sort of personalizes it to them, right? So for Target, like you would write something like, hey, knowing that you have a high supplement consumer with moms who are looking for sleep and mood, like we feel like these 2 SKUs would be quite perfect, right? And then we just kind of leave it. Like it's not super salesy, super pushy. We just say, hey, here's a presentation. If you'd love to kind of learn more, kind of let us know. So it's a very sort of soft, personalized, very honest approach. And quite honestly, we've had like a pretty good response to us reaching out to people. And sometimes people respond and say, for example, like we did the same type of thing for World Market. Like I went and looked up a buyer and sent it to her. And the response was like, hey, I really, really love this, but this type of product hasn't performed well for us in the past, but I'll keep you in mind. And that's okay, right? Like Target, we seem to have reached out to the right person at the right time and it worked. But I also, there's probably 10 other emails that I sent where I didn't get a response or I got a no. So in a way, it's sort of like a game of numbers in many ways.
That's really great advice. It just knowing that it's not going to be necessarily the first one that you send out. It could be the second, it could be the fifth, it could be the 35th, So just like what you mentioned earlier, it's all about that grit. You have to keep going. You have to keep finding those folks that you can send those emails to and keep reaching out. And I'm super glad that you did, because it's gotten you to where you are today. Any other advice that you would give entrepreneurs who are interested in getting into those larger name stores?
Yeah, I would just say do the homework, right? So yes, we just like look them up and, send an email. But before we do, I spend a really significant amount of time. Like if it's on the website, I go to the website, I look at the competition, I put an Excel sheet together of them, their pricing, our pricing. Like I want to know just as much as the buyer knows, if that sort of like makes sense. And in a way, I always look at it as a partnership. Like, hey, and there's always times when like I've looked at a website and I was like, you know what? I don't think we fit in their assortment. Like, I don't think it makes sense to reach out. By the same kind of token, I've had some accounts reach out to me and I said no to them because I was like, I just don't think this is the right time. I don't think we're going to do well. And so just put yourself in that mindset of partnership, know as much as the buyer knows, know the competition and really understand what it is that you're offering to them. And if I would say you do the research and you're like, are not sure that you have an offer or you have a differentiation, either maybe don't pitch them yet, or I would say kind of expect probably a no, right? Because if you haven't like found that hook or that in, they're going to be they know their category. So they're going to be really, really quick to come back to you and be like, I don't think this fits in. So I think a lot of times we talk about like how to reach out or like how to get there. But I think people forget that like there's hours and hours of prep a lot of times that can go into like a single outreach email if you're serious about it.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yep.
And then writing it out, I would be can you tell I'm anxious? I would be like so scared to actually like hit send. What are they going to think about me? So yeah, I think I'll be going on target.com and getting a little bit of help from Kindroot today. And so we all know entrepreneurship can be hard emotionally. It can be hard physically. Do you have any like wellness tips for entrepreneurs to kind of help their overall health?
Yeah. No, I would say absolutely find something that's an outlet and try to be like stick to it. I actually just recently discovered pickleball and I am obsessed. Like I am just absolutely obsessed. And I have this group of women that I play with on Wednesday evenings. And sometimes I get caught up in like, I'm behind, I need to accomplish things and I don't go. But when I do go, like my Thursday and Friday are just so much better mentally and emotionally. And I feel like I just perform so much better. I come from a place of like happiness. So, you're probably not going to have time to have like a ton of outlets, but find at least one outlet and like schedule time once or twice a week to do something that like feels like fun, doesn't feel like you're like just going through the motions or, getting to do it. So whatever it may be. I mean, for some people it can be like running, it can be going out to eat, it could be pickleball, yoga, whatever it is, but that has been key for me.
Yeah, find some way to get that out. I have to schedule it or it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if I swim pretty much every single day, but if I don't have it scheduled, I just won't show up. Be like, oh, no one's counting on me. It's fine.
Right.
It's the worst way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. And finally, any advice that you have for entrepreneurs in general?
Oh gosh, that feels like such like a big, kind of like big, great thing. But I think, it's one day at a time. Like I think it's one day at a time. And I think the one thing that I learned more and more is like, and it's really hard to do, and it doesn't mean I still don't do it, but comparisons are the worst thing. So, I'm really like having to remind myself that I'm in the right place today where I need to be. And that's the right kind of journey for my brand. And it can be hard because you're constantly seeing people making like millions of dollars a month. And you're like, why am I not there? And that is not productive. So I would say just like really focus inward and make decisions that are authentic. And I truly just sort of believe like you'll end up where you're meant to end up.
I think that sounds like super great advice. Absolutely. All right. This has been really cool. Lots of fun. One more question. How can our listeners support Kindroot?
Oh, thank you. Well, look, we want people to be aware of the brand and check us out. So I would say if you can follow us on social, we're at Kindroot on Instagram, Pinterest, we have TikTok. Just follow us. And of course, check out our site at kindroot.com, or there's always target.com. We love the sales there too.
Awesome. We're going to put all of those links in the show notes, but that is going to be it for today's episode of the Startup Savants podcast. Hey, thanks for hanging out. Hey, did you enjoy the show? We want to hear your opinion. Are we asking the right questions to these brave founders? Should we beat them up a little more to get all their secrets? Send us your feedback over to podcast@truic.com. We'll take any words you're willing to give. The other thing we would love from you is a review on Apple Podcasts. This will help us top those charts and show up in more searches so we can hang out with more cool entrepreneurs just like you. For tools, guides, videos, startup stories, and so much more, head over to truic.com. That's truic.com, TRUIC.com. See you, folks.
Bye.